Hello, this is Paul the Oka Knight, bringing you an overview of A Victory Awaits, a game designed by Tetsuya Nakamura, published by MMP. The game covers Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the USSR, from June to September 1941, at a game scale of about 10 miles a hex, 10 days per turn, 9 turns in every scenario, including the combined large scenario, at the division level, with about 760 printed half-inch counters and 3 full-size maps. Originally, the game was published as 3 separate games covering Army Group North, Army Group Center, and Army Group South. Each of the 3 games is included as a standalone scenario played on one of the 3 maps that is included in the game, or you can combine all 3 into a single large Operation Barbarossa campaign. The 3 maps included cover a 57 by 34 inch area with some overlap on the maps because of the requirements of each of the individual scenarios. So the game footprint is not quite as big as it would otherwise be because of that overlap. So maybe it'll make it a little easier to fit the full game on your tabletop. The game map itself has a pleasing appearance in terms of its color and the textures that it is used, and is also very functional. Everything is easy to tell exactly what's in each and every hex, and all of the usual suspects are here in terms of railroads and roads and woods and all of that kind of stuff. The only negative side is that the game is designed with half-inch counters, so it's using the older style smaller hexes to accommodate them. And the coolest part of the map is that it includes the area of the world where my wife came from, in Lithuania. And as I said, the counters themselves are half-inch, and they represent the various divisions and headquarters that were involved in the campaign. Each has a colored bar associated with it that basically lets you know where that unit is supposed to set up. The armored units come with your choice of using silhouettes or symbols. The armored units are basically double counted in the set because you could use them either way to suit your individual preference. Armored units have 3 ratings on them that are all easily readable, and it's the usual suspects of attack, defend, and movement. Other units simply have a combat factor and movement factor. Despite being only a half-inch, the counters look to be uncluttered enough so that they're going to be easily used on this map, and I don't expect most people will have any trouble with that. But with a stacking limit of 2, not as bad as it could be, but you should bring your tweezers along for the ride. The game includes a number of player aids. It includes 4 different versions of the turn track that have additional information on them that are scenario related. So you'll have a turn track for the Army Group North scenario, a different one for Army Group Center, a different one for Army Group South, and then a different one again when you're playing the combined game. But all of them, no matter which scenario you pick, are 9 turns long, which would be the first 90 days of the invasion of the Soviet Union. Each of the turn tracks contains information such as the maximum number of command chits each side can use in that turn, as well as the total universe of command chits that are available for that turn, which means that the number of command chits that you can use is, for most turns, is going to be smaller than the number you have to use, which introduces a small problem for solitaire suitability. Solitaire suitability is listed as high on the game box, but this is hidden information that when you're playing solitaire introduces a small problem. I do think that because of the nature of chit pool games that it will be a small problem, but it's something to be aware of. And there's also reinforcements that are listed for each side for each turn of the game. The combat results table is pretty standard, which is an odds-based table with step reduction and retreats. So all standard stuff. And actually that's a general comment on this game, is that everything looks pretty much old school, with the exception and the twist that it has been modernized as a chit pool game, which is kind of an interesting combo. So I'm looking forward to getting this one set up and play some turns. The terrain effects chart is also pretty standard. Really the only thing that is of note that I can spot is that when units are attacking across the river, only the units that are actually attacking across the river are halved. Any units that are on the other side of the river along with the defender attack at full strength. Most older games would go ahead and say that, well, if you have even one unit attacking on the same side of the river as the defender, that all of the units count full. This one says no, if you're going over a river, even if there's other guys attacking from the defender's side of the river, they're halved anyway. Anybody attacking over the river is halved, period, amen. The other thing that's maybe slightly different is that there's two movement modes, a normal mode and a strategic mode. And when you're using normal movement, you can enter and leave roads as you see fit, but the roads cost 1 movement point per hex. In strategic mode, you are road bound. You can't go into enemy zones of control, but you also only pay ½ a point per hex of movement on the road. So there's a little give and take. The rules themselves are 16 pages long, with 8 pages actually being the standard rules for the game. So this is not a big game as far as rules. I'd say that what Nakamura did is that he really took all of the regular hex encounter, land battle, game mechanics concepts, distilled them down to kind of a minimalist approach. But everything that you need is there, but not a lot more. And then added the twist of a chit pool game on top, and you end up with, I think, something that's going to work pretty well. Now, as I said, 8 pages are standard rules. There's 1 page of optional rules, which you can use at your discretion, and 2 pages of scenario information for setup and victory and all of that stuff. Again, there are 3 scenarios, 1 for Army Group North, 1 for Army Group Center, 1 for Army Group South, each using a different one of the 3 maps, each using the appropriate set of units for that part of the campaign, and each having a different turn track with scenario-dependent information included. There are also 2 pages of multiplayer rules. The game says that up to 8 people can play it. Good luck finding that many people to play, but if you can, up to 8 people can play it. And there's also a role for what they term a controller, which I think that's an attempt to allow more than one chit pool to be active at once, and you have one player playing traffic cop and with some guidelines as far as that goes. And there's also a section for trying to do this without a controller, but they introduced this concept of a controller for a multiplayer game. I have no idea how well that works. I don't have 8 people to play this game with. The rules also include a full table of contents with no index. Normally that's a pet peeve, not having an index, but when you're only dealing with 8 pages of rules, I think I can cut them some slack on this one. And the table of contents is exhaustive. It includes everything, so it fills an entire page. So you have 1-page table of contents telling you what's in 8 other pages. That's not bad. The rules themselves are very well written, and they're very well illustrated with some examples, although there's no extended example of play included and no player handbook included in the package either. The rules are translated from Japanese, but when I read them, it really shows no sign of having been a translation. I think they did an excellent job of doing that. It should pose no problems for anyone. Sequence of play. Well, the first phase is the selection phase, where each player looks at their turn track, has the list of command chits that are available to them, and has the maximum number that they can actually put in the cup. From that universe of chits that they have available, they select a certain number that they can put in the cup. Their opponent does the same. This is done secretly. Neither side knows what the other puts in the cup. And there's a few utility ones, such as when reinforcements come and when the supply phase happens. Those are also put in the cup and mixed in with all the others. Second is the command phase, where a counter is drawn from the cup. And then third is the activation phase. So generally speaking, you're going to draw an Army headquarters out of the cup. Units that are within 4 of the Army headquarters on the map are active, except for other headquarters. Headquarters do not activate headquarters. They only activate combat units. To make things even more interesting, the German player has 2 counters, a Guderian counter and a Manstein counter, with associated headquarters on the map. And he gets to choose when to use those counters. In fact, he doesn't have to choose until after the counter is actually drawn from the cup, and then he can decide to use one or the other of these to trump what was just pulled out of the cup, returns to the cup, and is available for being pulled in the future. But this would be a way of doing a number of things. If the German pulled one of his headquarters out of the cup, did his movement, did his attack, was successful, and maybe now there's a hole in the line, and he's got Guderian or Manstein in the area. Another counter would come out of the cup. Okay, I don't want that one. I want to use Guderian. The counter that came out of the cup goes back in the cup, and now anybody within 4 of Guderian is active. And units can activate as many times as they are within 4 of a headquarters during a turn. That means units can have maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe, who knows, maybe 4 activations if there's enough headquarters in the area. So having the breakthroughs and envelopments and encirclements and then running for daylight after a hole has been punched, all of these things are possible in this game. But they're done with a minimum of rules. It's kind of amazing how much is in this game for as small as the rules are. Then it's the operations phase. The operations phase, after the counter's been pulled out of the cup, you actually move the units and have combat. First comes movement, then comes combat. The unit does not have to stay within the activation radius of the headquarters, so they can go ahead and leave that. That's fine. The game includes zones of control. These are permeable zones of control. Every time a unit wants to enter or leave a zone of control, they have to pay 2 extra movement points. So the fastest units of the game are the armor. They have 10 movement points, which means a Zok-to-Zok movement is going to be cost of terrain, plus 2 for leaving a zone of control, plus 2 for entering a zone of control. So that's half the movement. So you can go through zones of control, but it's going to slow you down. It's definitely going to be a speed bump. To remain in play for the long run, units must trace supply by maintaining a line of communications back to a supply source that are scattered around the edges of the map. German units and Russian units trace line of communications slightly different from one another. The Russians simply need to trace a path of hexes free from German zones of control of any length back to a supply source. The Germans must be able to trace back 6 hexes from the unit to a railroad, which must run uninterrupted back to their supply sources. I don't have a good feel for how different one is from the other. There may be some greater opportunities to cause the Germans problems, but I think in general it's going to be the Russians that are having the issues with supply in the game. When a unit has no line of communications open to a supply source, they are going to lose 1 step when the supply chit is drawn from the cup. Each unit only has 2 steps. There are some with 1, but in general units are going to have 2 steps, so they lose half their strength if they do not have a line of communications to a supply source. And after 2 turns of isolation, it is going to be picked up. When units pick up, Soviet units pick up first, then Germans, which means that once the Soviet units pick up, perhaps lines of communication will open up to German units that would have otherwise have taken a loss. In addition, the Germans, in addition to having a little bit different way of tracing to their supply sources, they do not have to worry about that for the first 3 turns of the game. The Germans are all automatically in supply for the first 3 turns, so they can go blitzing through zones of control or wallowing through because of all the effects zones of control have, surrounding Russian units, and not have to worry about getting themselves cut off. The Soviet has the option of building fortresses to increase their defense in certain hexes. Fortresses can be either a level 1 or a level 2, and the Soviet has control over that. Every turn, the Soviets get to build up to 2 steps of fortresses. And the fortresses do not count for stacking, so they do add to the defense, but they do not count for stacking. Units inside of a fortress will suffer combat losses instead of retreats, so they're going to be stubborn. I think that they're going to take their hits, for sure, and get eliminated. They're not going to be like the Rock of Gibraltar, but they will slow the German down. They also don't have to worry about supply when they're in their fortress. In addition, there are stand fast markers that start the game deployed in various locations on the map, generally going to be cities. And beginning turn 6, the Soviet player begins to remove them 1 a turn. Each of these counters, if captured by the German, is worth victory points. So it gives a reason for pushing, for making fast progress to the German that might not otherwise be there. And there is a provision for breakthrough. If the Germans actually reach a map edge and capture Soviet supply sources, they will be rewarded with victory points. And if the Germans meet the victory point bogey at the end of 9 turns, they win the game. My general thoughts on the game are that the chit pull mechanic should work very well with this game. I see no reason why it shouldn't. My thoughts on the effect on solitaire play, given the choices that need to be made to feed the cup, I think it's not going to be an issue. Heck, A Most Fearful Sacrifice had a similar issue where you're hand-picking a couple cards out of your event deck and putting them in the deck. I didn't see it as a problem in that game, and I don't see it as a major problem here either. But I am noting it for you. The decision to not link combat units to headquarters with a hard link, it allows units to be activated by a variety of headquarters in a given turn. It allows for multiple activations. That is going to allow for some free movement, some exploitation, and adding the Guderian and Manstein activation chits that can be used at will by the German, including interrupting a pull of an opposing headquarters, I think is going to make the game very fluid. It should model the movement of the German units that should be there at this point at the very beginning of the campaign against the Soviet Union. It should be there. I think that's going to put it there. And also the issue of surrounding units and eliminating them fairly quickly. They lose a step a turn and each unit only has 2 steps. That'll whittle them down to size fairly quickly, especially if you manage to encircle large numbers of opposing units. And there's one other aspect that is in the game. The Soviets essentially get unlimited infantry reinforcements. When infantry units die from combat or because they couldn't make a required retreat, they get put back in the reinforcement pool and they come back again. It's not true for armored units, and it's also not true for units that surrender, that perish because they were out of supply. So that would be a way of reducing the force pool available to the Soviets, is by surrounding and basically having them surrender due to lack of supplies after 1 or 2 turns. And my bottom line for the game is that it appears to be a very clean design, and I think that's a typical trademark for Mr. Nakamura. I think what he did with Fire in the Sky was outstanding, taking the World War II Pacific campaign and distilling it down the way he did was really good. And I think that we're going to see the same thing here, and this is going to be a very playable game from what I see. It gets kind of close to that mini monster level. When you're talking 3 maps or 2 3/4 maps, something like that, you're getting up there, and you're getting, let's say with the duplicate counters, with the different silhouette styles, let's say there's 700 combat units. No, it's going to be some, let's say 650 combat units, something like that. Okay, that's a fair number of guys on the map. So I think I'd be comfortable saying this is a mini monster, or at least somewhere on that border between large and mini monster. You get to decide what that means. But it's not a small game when you're playing the full 3-map campaign. It's not small. I'd say the game is good for solitaire play, maybe not perfect, but certainly good, or maybe very good. And the rules for team play are interesting if you can get a group of people together. I don't know about 8 people. I don't know, but I think clearly you could do 6. I mean, if each player is controlling 1 army group map, that could make for an interesting game. Okay, everybody, that's it for this one. I think it's a good one. I think you'd like it. And as far as what we're doing here, if you've come this far with me and you have not subscribed, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Go ahead and hit the notification bell. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up and send me a comment. I do like to see what you guys have to say. But for now, I think that's all we're going to have. So this is Paul, the Oka Knight, wishing you all a pleasant evening.